All right, here we are for another installment of the weekly Sonneteer. And today I've got a sonnet by a woman who is the first poet that I fell in love with. Um, I remember, I guess it was probably either my junior or senior year of undergrad in college when I found I was at a used bookstore and found this little natty paper-bound edition of Edna St. Vincent Millay's collected lyrics. And I read it through 3 or 4 times and was just wowed. So definitely Edna St. Vincent Millay, or Millay as I'll call her from here on out, is the first poet that I ever read a collection of poetry by. And she had me hooked. A couple of things I would say about Millay. It's interesting. She lived from 1892 to 1950. So kind of first half of the 20th century poet. She was the first woman ever to win the Pulitzer Prize for poetry, and the second person to win the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. She lived in Greenwich Village in New York City, which at the time, I'm not sure what Greenwich Village is like today, but at the time it was sort of a hub of bohemian artists, meaning, singers, artists, writers, who were basically, when I say bohemian, they were just, they were living on the fly, right? Not a whole lot of cash, living in, rundown buildings and stuff with the bare essentials, spending their money on alcohol, cigarettes, and art supplies, I guess, right? Um, and there was, among other things, there was a lot of free sex going around. And so it's interesting, like one of the things that Millay is really well known for is the jadedness of some of her poetry. I would say probably her most anthologized sonnet is called, the title is What Lips My Lips Have Kissed. And it's basically a sonnet in which she's lying there, kind of this worn out middle aged woman, and she's trying to remember how many men she slept with, and she can't remember. Um, and and she was kind of well known for kind of her, loose sexual mores and just being this flamboyant out there character. And I gotta say, personally, that's kind of what she's known for, most famous for, but not necessarily what grabbed my attention when I first picked up that book of collected lyrics and read her. Like, to me, she's just this genius of the natural world. The way she writes about animals, about flowers, about the natural world it's beautiful. And so that is what I love about Millay when she's talking about that. And sometimes the jadedness of her life and her just beautiful natural description, sometimes those come together in her poetry. But she just wowed me in my initial readings with the way she talks about nature. And so the sonnet that I want to talk about today in this 16th installment of the weekly Sonneteer, right, is called The Fledgling. And so it is, the point of the fledgling is there, right in the comments section if you want to read along as I go, but I'll read it for you here. The fledgling. So art thou feathered, art thou flown, thou naked thing, and canst alone upon the unsolid summer air sustain thyself and prosper there? Shall no more with anxious note advise thee through the happy day, thrusting the worm into thy throat, bearing thine excrement away? Alas, I think I see thee yet, perched on the windy parapet. Defer thy flight a moment still to clean thy wing with careful bill. And thou art feathered, thou art flown, and hast a project of thine own. All right, I'll read it again for you. The Fledgling. So, art thou feathered? Art thou flown, thou naked thing? And canst alone upon the unsolid summer air sustain thyself and prosper there? Shall no more with anxious note advise thee through the happy day, thrusting the worm into thy throat, bearing thine excrement away? Alas, I think I see thee yet, perched on the windy parapet. Defer thy flight a moment still to clean thy wing with careful bill. And thou art feathered, thou art flown, and hast a project of thine own. Okay, let's look at this. This is a little different than some other sonnets we've looked at. The rhyme scheme is just couplets, right? There's none of that. One thing. It's funny. Like Edna Millay was conceivably in her day, in her time, she was like the most popular poet in America, quite possibly. After she died, her reputation kind of took a nosedive, and a lot of that was because the structure of her poetry. Well, her poetry is very structured. It's almost always got meter. It's almost always got rhyme. And so she kind of fits with a lot of the sonnets that we've looked at, which were very traditional in structure. But, she was right on the cusp of, these innovations in poetry, where these innovations in poetry where people were trying to do new stuff and get away from meter and get away from rhyme, right? And so again, Millay's reputation kind of reputation kind of fell from glory after she died for that reason. But I mean, if you haven't figured it out by now, I like structured poetry, and so let's look through this. Again, not a very traditional sonnets because you don't have the ABAB thing. It's just rhymed couplets. Flown alone, air there, note. But then she goes back and forth. She's like playing by the rules. So art thou feathered art, thou flown, thou naked thing, and canst alone upon the unsolid summer air. That unsol, she's kind of like trying to make you read unsol as one syllable, when in fact it's three, okay? So she knows the rules and therefore she's breaking them, that kind of thing. Sustain thyself and prosper there. Shall no more with anxious note. There she totally breaks it, right? She doesn't stick to the iambs, which we've talked about. If you don't know what iambs are, go back to like the weekly Sonneteer 1 and 2 where we talked about that. So she knows the rules. She knows how to write meter. She likes meter, but she likes her iambs, or her iambic bongos, as Billy Collins called them. But she's willing to break the rules and mess around with it some. Her rhyme scheme is not, it doesn't follow any fixed pattern. You've got a couple of couplets right off, flown alone, air there, but then she goes into more kind of a Shakespearean type pattern where it's like note and throat and day and away, right? And then she goes back to her couplets. Yet, parapet, still, bill, flown, own. And so she likes the traditional pattern. She also likes to mess with you a little bit. Not a very structured rhyme scheme, but yet it all does rhyme. And occasionally she breaks up her meter just for the fun of it, right? Okay, so let's go through and unpack this poem some. So art thou feathered? art thou flown? The fledgling. A fledgling is a baby bird. A bird that's like a fledgling is not a baby bird. It's a bird that is like getting ready to slash is leaving the nest. Okay, so it's got its feathers. It's getting ready to slash is leaving the nest. And so imagine Malay is like a mother bird. Okay, and she's like, "Art thou feathered? Art thou flown?" She's like, "Did you get your feathers already? Did you already leave the nest? Where are you?" Right? Thou naked thing. It's like, a parent who their kid grows up and then they're like, "What happened? How'd you grow up so fast?" Or you're like, "Mom, Dad, I'm not a kid anymore." And so she's like a mother bird who's like, just the other day you were just this naked, helpless thing, and now you've got feathers and you've left the nest. And canst alone upon the unsolid summer air sustain thyself and prosper there? This mother bird is like, can you really survive in the unsolid air? The air doesn't just lift you up by itself. You got to flap your wings. Can you actually survive out there on your own, on that unsolid air, all by yourself? And can you prosper there? Can you actually thrive? Can you make it out in that environment, away from my protection, away from my nest? Shall, and it would help, her meter's kind of funky here. It would help if you throw a pronoun in there. Shall I? Let's go ahead and say, shall I no more? Because I think it's an intended I. Shall I no more with anxious note advise thee through the happy day? Am I not going to give you advice throughout each day anymore? Like worried, be careful, honey, am I not going to give you my concerned advice anymore, right? Thrusting the worm into thy throat, bearing thine excrement away. Honey, are you saying that I'm not going to feed you anymore, And I'm not going to carry your poop away, get it out of the nest for you, right? Wipe your butt, whatever, right? Alas, she says. And here she goes, Italian, here she goes Petrarchan, Italian sonnet on us, which again, Italian sonnet, and we talked about that in the first couple of episodes, but again, it's kind of this 8-line, then 6-line pattern. So the first 8 lines of this poem are the questions, right? And then she has this distinct switch in tone and pattern. It's no longer questions the next 6 lines. So you've got an 8-line segment, a 6-line segment, the Italian sonnet, right? The next 6 lines change in tone. Alas, she's just been asking these questions, this mother bird, right? And now she's like, alas, she's like, oh, it sinks in. My baby bird is gone, right? Alas, I think I see thee yet. I see, it's almost like I can still see you there, perched on the windy parapet, perched on the edge of the nest. Although parapet is like a castle wall, which is a so much cooler word to put there, right? Alas, I think I see thee yet, perched on the windy parapet, with the wind blowing through your feathers as you were perched on the nest just a minute ago, right? Alas, I think I see thee yet, perched on the windy parapet. Defer thy flight a moment still. I see you deferred. You waited just a moment to clean thy wing with careful bill. I remember you stood there. You waited for just a moment so that you could clean your wing a little bit with your bill. And then here we have, here we have the last 2 lines, which again, she's kind of like mixing her, her forms here. I mean, your Shakespearean sonnet ends with the couplet at the end, which wraps everything up, right? And so you could, there's a bit of the Italian with the 8-line, 6-line going on here, but there's also the Shakespearean in a sense with this couplet at the end. She's got all sorts of influence going on in this poem, right? Again, she knew the rules and she broke them all the time, right? But she liked to kind of play by them. So these last 2 lines, she says, and thou art feathered, thou art flown, and hast a project of thine own. The first line, she's like, art thou feathered? art thou flown? Have you really grown your own feathers? Have you really flown away and left home, left the nest? And she said in the last two lines, thou art feathered. Yes, you. She like it's the mom or acknowledging, yes, my baby bird, right, is feathered. It has flown and has a project of thine own. In other words, you've got plans of your own now. You've got dreams of your own now. Now, I would say you may be like, I'm not a mother or a father, and I don't really get this, yeah, but or you may be like, well, that's so cool because I can relate because I had clingy parents. On some level, I'm sure all parents are a bit clingy because it just goes with the territory of being a parent. I haven't had to I haven't had to watch my own kids flap away yet, but I know I'll have some of that feeling when it gets time, right? But you know, as I read this poem, I've always thought every time I read it that it could be a metaphor for something else too. Okay, the fledgling could not just be a baby bird or a metaphor for somebody's kid, right? Because I could be wrong. I don't believe St. Vincent Millay even had kids. But it could also be the fledgling could be something you have created, something you have made. You painted a painting, you wrote a song, you wrote a book. And, there's the tendency for artists, for writers, that we hold, we want to keep, many of us want to keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking something, trying to make it perfect, trying to make it better. And we're afraid to let it go, especially those of us who really care about it looking good, which is a good instinct, to a certain degree, because a lot of what gets published these days and thrown out there, you can tell people, maybe they had a good idea, but they didn't bother to make it look good before they put it out there. It could have been better if they had not been in a rush to show everybody their cool, social media video or whatever, right? And so taking the time to make something good before you put it out there for other people to see, for other people to read, it's kind of a lost art these days, And Edna Millay, one reason I think this may be a metaphor for that is because she was such a stylist, which is kind of why she had that fall from grace after she died. But again, with that, so when I read this, I'm like, maybe the fledgling is a poem, and it's like, a poet, Millay, for example, will write this poem and she's working on it and working on it and working on it. She doesn't want to let it go. But eventually it gets published. And when it's out there published, it's really hard to make it better, It's really hard to change it. It's, just like it's hard to teach your kids as much once they're out in the world, right? You've let go, they're out there. Or for your parents to keep over you once you've stepped out, right? And so the same with a poem or a song or a work of art. You can hold it, you can take care of it, but sooner or later, when you publish it, when you put it out there, it's like it's not yours anymore, in a way, Other people have got it. And so that is this poem, The Fledgling, for you. All right. Thanks for listening. Feel free, if you got the time, to drop a comment in the bottom there in comments. It likes are great, but I love to really know what people think about something. Thank you. Bye.